Part 2. The Bloc advances. Athenican President Ron Andus and the Federation Senate received the news of the invasion of Talos 12 days after the invasion began. Orders were sent to the western provinces of the Federation to call a third of their fleet to arms and begin fortifying their port cities. But before Federation forces were able to mobilize, the Gontar-Talos War was over. It was a shock to the world that the kingdom fell with such ease to the hegemony, and even more of a shock when the world learned of the Bamli massacre and the brutal tactics of the Gontar forces. King Valric, ruler of the Kingdom of Zel, also began preparing for war. He also sent diplomats to the Gontar forces in Talos seeking diplomacy with the hegemony. Unbeknownst to King Valric, Gontar leadership had already decided before they invaded Talos that Zel would not be invaded. Unlike Talos, Zel had extremely strong city defenses and a huge number of slaves that could be used to fight against an invading army. While Gontar was confident they could successfully invade Zel, it would be too costly and time-consuming. Gontar had much greater ambitions in the Midlands. To the world's surprise, Gontar and Zel signed a non-aggression pact on the first day of the 7th moon. Once word had reached the southern Gontar forces in Enil of the conquering of Talos and the non-aggression pact with Zel, the Gontar hegemony and the Order of Okosha officially formed the Bloc, an alliance between the two nations with the founding charter's mission statement being to re-establish the natural order and the proper hierarchy to the world. On the 6th day of the 7th moon, Bloc fleets invaded the Hanavor Diarchy. Though the Gontar-Talos and Saharian-Akulak War are often considered a part of the Great War, this date is almost universally accepted as the official beginning of the Great War. The largest fleet left Almala and engaged Hanavor forces in Seamurden, a slightly smaller fleet attacked Ashsadar, and two smaller fleets attacked the mining cities of Lefrand and Imnahil in the Mithsalin Mountains. While the Diarchy had sufficient defenses on their border to thwart any attack from the Order, they were ill-prepared for the additional Gontar forces and hadn't had nearly enough time to shore up their power in the region. They, like the rest of the world, were caught completely by surprise at the sudden Gontar aggression. The Gontar fleet in the south of the Lake of Okosha captured the city Ashsadar on the 10th and moved further into Hanavor territory, capturing the city of Thilsir on the 18th. The mining cities of Lefrand and Imnahil were captured on the 11th and the 14th respectively. Hanavorian ships from these cities retreated to the city of Seamurden where they joined in the defense of the city. A fierce and costly battle was still being waged in this city as Hanavor devoted nearly half of the forces in the province to the defense of this, one of the four original elven cities. Seamurden was eventually captured on the 3rd day of the 8th moon, as the Diarchy retreated all its forces in the Mithsalin Mountains to the city of Thively. With the loss of the Mithsalin Mountains and the ancient city of Seamurden, a huge blow was dealt to the Diarchy. Meanwhile, in the north, the hegemony had begun purchasing thousands of slaves from the Kingdom of Zel. The slaves would serve to replace the Talos soldiers that had either been killed in the war or had deserted their posts after the kingdom fell to the hegemony. While the kingdom's fleet and resources were being used to feed the hegemony's war machine, there were many missing Talosian ships and thousands of soldiers that were still unaccounted for. By the end of the 7th moon, several dozen warships and thousands of soldiers had been deployed from Gontar to Talos to reinforce the northern Gontar fleet. These forces would be split up to serve three main functions. The smallest of these three factions were used to establish order and rule in the Talosian cities, especially in the capital city and the mining cities. The other two factions made up two large fleets that were docked in the cities of Draxtege and Helster. The smaller of the two fleets was docked in Helster under the command of Admiral Lars Virik, a ruthless and brilliant strategist, aboard the Gontar battleship Kimlan. The largest fleet was under the direct command of Renda Sikla, docked in Draxtege. This fleet, made up of 45 Gontar warships and 7 carriers, led by the dreadnought Korgil, set sail into the Sea of Zel on the 29th. The fleet would arrive in the minor kingdom of King Ford 5 days later. Renda Sikla's forces were greeted by a fleet of 4 King Ford warships, 2 Athenican warships and 2 Onyxian warships, which were docked in the kingdom per conditions of a treaty between the three powers and robust city defenses. As the massive Gontar fleet surrounded the city, Renda Sikla met with King Agwaric along with diplomats from the Federation, Onyxian Union and the Republic of Sigoria, within the walls of the city. The Supreme Admiral laid out his terms to King Agwaric. The kingdom could either break all its former treaties with the other powers of the world and join the Gontar hegemony, granting everyone in the kingdom full citizenship and the full protection of the hegemony, or the kingdom could keep its independence and hope that the other powers of the world honored their commitments to the kingdom before it suffered the same fate as Bamnay. On the 8th of the 8th moon, the minor kingdom of Kingford joined the hegemony as a vassal state. By the middle of the 8th moon, the High Council of the Hanavor Diarchy, led by High Cash Varela Vorainor, had called back to the Hanavor province nearly 100 ships and over 16,000 soldiers from the other provinces within the Diarchy. While the Diarchy had taken a beating over the first month and half of the war, they were preparing to launch a huge counter-offensive when, on the 16th of the 8th moon, the Confederacy of Lix joined the bloc. A fleet of 17 Lix warships attacked the city of Amrian Ain. Though the fleet was unable to take the city after the 10-day attack, it had dealt a significant blow to the city, killing over 1,000 Hanovorians and destroying 3 of the 6 Class 3 warships protecting the city. The same fleet would begin an attack 10 days later in the city of Lizarada, and this time the fleet was able to take the city. At the same time, the bloc attacked and took the Heth Sarari and Yenil by the end of the 8th moon. During this time the Federation, the Republic of Sigoria and the minor kingdom of Zarahara signed an alliance, forming the League on the 21st of the 8th moon. The terms of the alliance were delivered to the rest of the major powers. Any attack on any one of the 3 powers would be considered an act of war on all 3. In addition to this, the Onyxian Union, while not signing on to the League, made it clear that they viewed an attack on Zarahara as a line in the sand that they wouldn't tolerate being crossed. While President Anders had fortified the cities in the Frampton and Antori provinces, many ships that had been previously deployed to these provinces were called back to the Athenican and Posterior provinces after the Kingdom of Kingford joined the hegemony. When news of the Confederacy joining the bloc reached Athos and Drymond, President Anders and Chancellor Dron Jacobs, leader of the Republic of Sigoria, held a joint meeting of the senates of each nation to discuss bringing the Diarchy into the League, thus entering the war against the bloc. There was fierce debate, but in the end the Chancellor and his coalition won the day. The League would not enter the war unless one of the member states were attacked first. However, the League decided to take an escalatory action by shutting down all trade with the hegemony or the Kingdom of Zel through the Sea of Zarahar. A League blockade was set up just outside of Zarahara on the 5th of the 9th moon. This blockade was a risky move as the Kingdom of Sai ran. The Onyxian Union and the Japagian Federation conducted massive amounts of trade through the Zarahar Sea, but just before the blockade was formed, on the 3rd of the 9th moon, the Japagian Federation joined the League as well, which gave the League significantly more leverage in closing the trade routes in the Zarahar Sea. High Lord Eurocor, leader of the Japagian Federation, was a strong advocate of not entering the war, but he and the Japagi nation knew that if Athenica or Sigoria fell to the hegemony, it would be catastrophic for them as well, as the Japagi's biggest allies and trading partners were the 2 human nations, outside of Onyxia that is. Over the course of the next month, the Diarchy would have several battles in the region south of the Lake of Okosho. Thilsia and Thelarareth were taken and retaken by each side, but ultimately, on the 21st of the 9th moon, the Diarchy retreated its forces to Beleriasil. Old Hanavor was largely evacuated and left to be taken without conflict, as the city was more of a historical and religious site than a functioning city. During this time the bloc forces in the Mythsalin Mountains fortified their positions and reignited mining operations in the mountains, sending phystones and metal ore back to the Akashan territory. The Diarchy had fortified the city of Thively to such an extent, both with city defenses and a sizable fleet of warships and soldiers, that the bloc halted their advance on the northern Hanavor front. The Diarchy had also defended several attempts by the bloc to conquer the city of Amrian Ain, an important and wealthy city for the Diarchy. Meanwhile, on the 9th of the 9th moon, the Kingdom of Belzed signed a non-aggression pact with the bloc, and 5 days later, so did the Parian Kingdom. The Hanavor Diarchy responded to this move on the 20th by closing their borders to all ships, trade or otherwise, from the kingdoms. 10 days later, on the 30th, the Kingdom of Belzed took Elnamar, destroying a Hanavorian warship and killing several dozen people before the city surrendered. The Diarchy declared war on the kingdom 3 days later, sending requests to the Federation in the province of Solidinia to assist in the defense of Jammar, On the 5th of the 10th moon, the Parian kingdom took the city of Nalavina. The kingdoms of Belzed and Peria signed a non-aggression pact on the 9th, agreeing to split up the old cities of the kingdom of Shrana. The Parian kingdom took the city of Kanzan on the 10th, and the kingdom of Belzed took the city of Jammar on the 15th, after a bloody and brutal battle that saw the kingdom of Belzed suffer heavy casualties. Hanovorian forces would retreat to Gwalran inside the Federation. While the Federation had mobilized most of its forces on its northern and western borders to deter the Gontar fleets in Kingford and Helster, the tide had changed within the leadership of the Federation. With the kingdom of Belzed and the Parian kingdom declaring war on the already rapidly collapsing Diarchy, the Federation took the first concrete stance in solidarity with their close ally as a mixed Hanovorian and Athenican fleet, retook the city of Jammar on the 23rd of the 10th moon, formally declaring war on the two kingdoms. The Federation sent word to the two kingdoms that they would be invaded unless they retreated from Hanovorian territory. The kingdom of Belzed responded by sending word to the Athenican forces, and to the Gontar forces in Enil, of their intention to join the bloc. The Parian kingdom followed suit. During this time, the bloc began attacking and intercepting all trade ships from Enthias and Iril-Sholu to Achumos, and formed a blockade between these cities and Achumos. They also sent a large fleet of Gontar and Lix ships to Amrian Ain and took the city on the 14th of the 10th moon. The Diarchy increased their evacuation of the city of Achumos, but many civilian ships were captured or destroyed by the bloc's blockade. Warships from Enthias and Achumos managed to break the blockade several times during the 10th moon, but by the end of the 10th moon, it had become clear that Achumos was in grave danger of being sacked.